And welcome back. As we go ahead and continue looking at how to use Python, let's introduce another thing which we can use, which is lists. So what is a list in Python's context? Well, lists are used to store multiple items to a single variable. Lists are actually a built-in data type in Python that's actually used to store collections of data. And the way we go ahead about creating them is using square brackets. So for example, my list equals apple, banana, cherry. Now, the list items themselves are typically in a certain way. We would consider these to be ordered, they can be changeable, and we can allow duplicate values. So the list items are therefore indexed, such as first index being 0, second item one having 1. Very familiar concept for us if we're used to working with arrays or any kind of things in languages like Java. Now, when we say that the lists are ordered, it means that the items have a defined order and that order is not going to change. Notice that the item at position 0 is always going to be at position 0, 1 is always going to be at 1, etc. But if you do add new items to the list, the new items, of course, are going to typically be placed at the end list. If you just were to say, hey, I'm just going to add an item, it's always going on the end. Now, you can, of course, talk about insertion, which, of course, does reorder it a little bit because that's going to be a changeable property. But we'll talk about that in a second. Now, the list is changeable, which is, of course, the ability to change, add, or remove items from the list after it's been created. So this is the key thing here. After the list has been created, we then have the ability to go and modify those things. And since the lists have been indexed, 0, 1, 2, 3, to whatever, the list can have items with those corresponding values. Now, the first thing to talk about when we talk about lists, of course, is the length. So how many items are in that list? Well, we can use the len function to help us out. But just like we saw when we wanted to find, for example, the length of a string, we can do the same thing here with the list. So this list is equal to apple, banana, cherry. We could just print length of this list. Now, list items, of course, have corresponding things with their own data types. You can have your list be any data type and contain different data types. So, for example, we can do all strings, or we can do all numbers, or we can do booleans, or we can do a mix match of those three different types. Now, what about accessing the actual items of the list? Because it's great if we have a list, but it doesn't do us any good if we can't use that data in some way. Well, if I want to access them, remember that the list items are indexed, and we can access them by referring to the list number. So, for example, we can say this list is apple, banana, cherry. I can print this list 1, and it would, of course, go to the list, find out whatever position 1 is, and give me that value. Now, what if we wanted to change those item values? Well, to change the value of a specific item, we refer to the index number. So, for example, if I have a list, again, apple, banana, cherry, if I say this list 1 is equal to blackcurrant, and I print this list, we, of course, are referring to changing that specific value. If I want to insert a list, though, without replacing any of the existing values, we can use the insert method. And this will allow us to effectively add a fourth item to this list. So we, of course, could say, like if our list was apple, banana, cherry, we have to, of course, specify where we want to insert. So, for example, I say position 2, and I want to add watermelon and print the list, and then say apple, banana, cherry, watermelon. Now, what about adding or removing item values? Well, if we want to append an item, which means just to add it to the end of the list, I can use the append method here. So, for example, apple, banana, cherry, and then we append orange, it would then print out apple, banana, cherry, orange. If I want to remove an item, though, and let's say we, again, same list, apple, banana, cherry, and I use the remove command, it would then look for that first index of that occurring and take it out of the list. What about if I want to pop or clear a list? Well, a pop refers to removing a specific index. So I know, for example, I want to take out whatever's at value 1 or value 2. Well, I can use the pop command here to go ahead and remove that out of that list. So in this case, apple, banana, cherry would become just apple and cherry. If I want to clear the list, or in other words, remove everything out of the list to just make it blank, I can use the .clear method, and that, of course, that function will erase everything out of the list, and we wouldn't have any items in it. It would just be an empty list. Now let's go ahead over here to Visual Studio Code and take a look at some examples of these different things in work. So here we have a list called movies, and I have Star Wars, Harry Potter, and Lord of the Rings. I'm going to hit print off that list using just the print movies. Notice I don't need to do a string cast here because this is already a list of strings. And in this case, we are going to print out the length. Remember, length you do need to do a string cast for because length is going to return a integer value. And then, of course, we're printing a specific value of that. And here we're changing index values, we're inserting, we're appending, and we're popping, and then reprinting this list one more time. So let's go ahead and just give this a run. And one thing you see is as the list is currently, we get our initial list here. Then we get the length of list. It returns us the first value of the list, so that is 0 index right here. Then, of course, we're saying, hey, we want to start changing things. We want to insert things. We're going to append, and we're going to pop things off. So if you look, we have the final list is Star Wars, Dungeons & Dragons, Lord of the Rings, and Narnia. All right, because what happened is that it took and inserted, for example, these different things. So Percy Jackson got inserted at position 1, but then it got pushed down to position 2 because we inserted 1 here because we changed Percy Jackson 1. So this one got pushed down, which means this list technically, of course, would contain Percy Jackson until, of course, we popped it off here when we did this pop command. So if I were to, just to show here before I removed that list, if I were to just show movies, let's just go ahead and print it. Print movies just to show it before we popped off that item. You can see how that list has that item here at position 2. In fact, I could put this print command here throughout if you wanted to see how this works. But you can, of course, pretty easily figure out that how these are working because this is very similar to a lot of the commands, for example, we saw when we were working with lists not that long ago. That we were able to look at some of these things for, like, for example, array lists and some things with linked lists, that we can have some of this familiarity with concepts, and Python's going to use this very naturally and very easily. Now, of course, this is a very good start for us to be able to have some cool tools and be able to do some things with, but we need to, of course, have some practical applications. Obviously, we can do things like, for example, if I want to go through a list, I can use things like a loop to traverse through a list easily to look for certain things, or maybe I want to add up the values in a list. Very easy to do. But what's if I wanted to do bigger things with it? What's if I wanted, for example, to sort a list? Maybe I want to put things alphabetical, or maybe I want to find the smallest number that's in a list, and it's just random numbers. These are the kind of things that we're going to look at next to try and really add some more usefulness to this new structure that we just learned.